Welcome to Life in Accounting, the Where Accountants Go podcast. Life in Accounting is the podcast for everyday heroes like you working in the accounting profession. Are you ready to hear from accounting influencers, thought leaders, visionaries, and other professionals leading change in the accounting world? Then stay tuned for Mark Goldman, a CPA, the owner of Where Accountants Go, and your host. Welcome to Life in Accounting.
No success at work is worth failure at home.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Goldman, a CPA, and your host for Life in Accounting, the Where Accountants Go podcast. That clip was from Dena Jansen of Austin, Texas. Dena came to us via referral from one of our former guests on the show, and I really appreciated that she decided to share some of her time with us. As you're going to hear, Dena's had a very successful career in accounting, and we talk about how each stage had its own unique benefits along the way. But then towards the end of the interview, we get into Dena's new venture, actually, which although it definitely involves some similar skills, it's also definitely different than what we think of when we think of what an accounting career can prepare you for down the road. It's a really interesting twist. This is going to be a unique episode for us, so I hope you thoroughly enjoy the conversation. And if you do, please remember to check us out online as well at www.whereaccountantsgo.com for this and all our other episodes. And please subscribe right there on the webpage as well, or, of course, through your app on your phone through the iTunes directory, whatever your preferred listening device is. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Here's Dena Jansen of Austin, Texas.
Well, good morning, Dena. I know this is an exciting time for you, sir. I really appreciate you spending some of your time to share your story with the audience.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Well, for the audience, Dena Jansen in Austin, Texas, is on the show today to share her story with us. And it's going to be a little unique in that she's had a very, very, very successful career in accounting. And now she's actually embarking on a new direction. Dena, I'm going to skip a lot of the normal introduction I do because I really want to get to the meat of your story and use the time more for the audience to hear directly from you about your journey. Before we get into what you're going to be doing now, it's important that we get a full picture of sort of where you came from in the early days in your career. So let's start at the beginning. What initially caused you to think about accounting as a possible career in the first place?
It's a good question, and it's a good one to start with because when I think back, growing up, I really didn't know what career I wanted to land in. I remember bouncing between a lawyer. There for a while, I wanted to be a high school principal, specifically high school, and I couldn't really decide where I wanted to fall, but I guess I just always knew that I wanted to lead people and be in charge in some sort of way. So when I went to college, I actually decided to major in business management. It seemed logical. Everything I'd heard was that a business degree would really support me in whatever career I went into. And, well, why not manage people? But quickly in my first class, for my first business management class, my freshman year, I took, and it was so boring. And I don't know if it was the professor or me, but very quickly I realized that I don't know if this is what I really want to learn for the next 4 years. And at the same time, then that freshman year, I was taking my first accounting class, and people seemed to really be complaining about it and really not enjoying it. And I didn't think it was that bad. I was like, hey, the numbers make sense and everything equals out. And that kind of played into my desire to find answers. But the graduate assistant one day just said, you'll always be able to find a job if you major in accounting. And I think my brain went, okay, wait, what? I'll always have a job? And I think that security and knowing that it was coming pretty naturally to me and I found it pretty interesting, I changed my major. So once I changed my major, then dove into accounting and changed my track. And then I kind of really say that the machine took over because I went to Texas Tech University, all of the big four, the national accounting firms start recruiting pretty early. And then I just followed along wherever they told me to go and knew that long term, I thought accounting would be a really great place for me. So,
wow. I can't tell you how many people have come on the podcast and said someone at some point in their college career, usually early on, said, if you major in accounting, you'll always have a job. It's a very common reason, actually.
It's common, but it's true. And I truly feel like it's a wonderful skill set that people are looking for that skill set, whether you want to do it part-time on the side or whether you want to go and do it in industry or if you want to do it in public accounting. And really, I didn't even kind of know how many cool ways you could use accounting. I feel like I'm still learning. But it also, as a female, I also knew that it would afford me flexibility. And I didn't probably know that until I was in the moment, but I was told that I would be afforded flexibility. And absolutely, I've seen that play out in my career.
Interesting. Okay. So what was your first move out of college, your first internship or first job?
Sure. Well, I always like to mention, while I was in college, I always worked because I feel like I don't want to forget those first jobs, even though they weren't my first full-time jobs. So while I was in college, I actually interned at Arthur Andersen in San Antonio in the summer, which is not a normal internship time. So I actually did a lot of internal control process memos. It was pretty brutal. I remember being really excited one day when I actually got to foot something. But it was an interesting time then because when I came back to school, Arthur Andersen and Enron happened. So a lot of me and my coworkers who had internships and had full-time offers with Andersen then were quickly looking for other opportunities. So for me then, even after I graduated, I knew I was going to be staying in Lubbock for one more year as my husband finished out school. So I ended up working at a local firm in Lubbock, and I was connected to them through my college professor. I mentioned that off the bat, people who don't go through the entire accounting program in college don't really appreciate it, but some really don't appreciate governmental accounting. And that was another class where, oddly, I actually found it really interesting and thought it was cool how it all worked and fit together. And so I was able to be a graduate assistant for Dr. Robert Freeman, who was a former member of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So in school, I was working kind of under an expert, and he was able then to refer me to my first job there in Lubbock and then even on to my second. So my first job, I worked in a local firm and did, again, predominantly governmental type clients, so municipalities and school districts. And it was a really wonderful time because the hours weren't so intense that I was able to do my job but also study for the exam, which I took then that first year. I like to say really old school style because it was 2 full days of sitting in a big conference center with my Ziploc baggie and my pencils, So we did that, and we lived there for a year while my husband finished out, and then we moved home, and I started working at Deloitte & Touche here in Austin.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember the Ziploc baggie. It had to be a clear bag.
Yes, it did.
I had to be able to see what was in there.
It was exhausting those 2 days, and they saved that I think it was FAR those days. Just the hardcore, intense math, and it was that last part of the second day, and I just didn't even know. I felt like I was just drawing pictures with the bubbles at the end. I was pretty shot, but so.
Yeah, it was a little different back then.
Mm-hmm.
Well, while you were at Deloitte, were you on any specific team, or did you have any specialties? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So my entire time in the public accounting space, I've always been on the audit side of the house.
Oh.
And I remember in college, I share this story, and I'll share why in a moment. I'll give you a caveat after. But I remember someone also saying, well, what are you going to do? You have to choose a track, audit or tax. And I said, well, I haven't done either. How do I know? How do I know what to pick? And they were like, well, do you like people? And I said, well, yeah, I like people. And they were like, well, then you should do audit. And I was like, well, okay. And so I chose that track, again, not having either. Now looking back, again, I am so appreciative of the folks on the tax side because they for sure work with people because they do my taxes. I can't even do my own for sure. But I have then been on the audit side of the house the whole time, specialized again. I moved over again since I had my connection with Dr. Freeman. He helped me meet someone here in town. So again, I was working in the government side, working on about 5 really large clients, cities and counties, government agencies, and some private colleges and universities. So I came in as an experienced hire, and I stayed on till the time I was a senior manager.
Wow. Okay. How long was that, more or less?
So I was there for 8 years.
Okay. But before we move on out of that period, what do you feel you gained from that experience, like from a holistic perspective for your career? What benefit do you feel like you gained from being one of the big four for that long?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I walk away with it, I feel like I kind of have three things that have stuck with me. One, and sometimes you don't realize you learn these things till you're out of the walls. So it's really nice to have the hindsight. But I feel like first I did realize that I really did like people. So I really loved working in teams, and not only just my engagement teams, but with the clients. You find really quickly in public accounting, whether you're in tax or audit, that you learn so much about project management and how you manage your team and your clients. So those first couple of years, you're really learning about yourself, right? Because you're being managed, and you learn, well, how do I do what I do and how do I do it best? And I am deadline driven, so I've learned that about myself. But how can I start building relationships with just my team members, but also with my clients? So I feel like you're given a really wonderful opportunity to mix and mingle with all different people, because you're kind of new into the profession. But as you grow into that, those relationships expand and you see people move. Clients move to different clients, and you get to learn where they are in their industries. And so just really learning that I loved people and that there's so many wonderful people out there that are resources for us. And then speaking of resources, I feel like that was the second thing I learned, was that access to resources and experts, it's just necessary in what we do. There's so much information, and everything we do is so technical and oftentimes so compliance driven that you realize you quickly can't know it all. So not only do I feel like there's a really important focus that needs to be had on finding a niche, an area of expertise that you can find as early in your career as you can, also then finding out just who are the other experts that you can reach out to when something new comes up, because that is what I felt like I learned from watching others, was how can we connect other people in ourselves, our clients, our teammates, to information if we don't have them, because there's just a lot and we want to get to the best answer. So I feel like learning how to find resources, and whether that's just online resources or actual human experts, that was key. And then really last for me was that I realized that I was truly blessed to really be surrounded by a lot of strong female leadership. Like I mentioned, I knew going in I wanted to have a family one day, and I did. I ended up having 2 children while I was at Deloitte, and I was surrounded by women who supported me in what my career would look like with 2 children. And I did go to a reduced workload after my first child and stayed on that throughout the rest of my time at Deloitte. And I was supported in that. And I remember just knowing, like, these are other women who are trying to balance. They have career aspirations. They have families that they want to be with. And they also want to, somehow take care of themselves. And I just remember feeling really supported in that, and knowing that wherever I went in the future, I wanted a place that was like that. And I wanted to be that kind of person for other women.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because when I've asked other individuals about their experience at the Big Four, the access to resources is one of the common, items that comes up, and just the quality of the experience and that kind of thing. But you're the first person to bring up family flexibility. That's interesting. I think that's good for people to hear.
And it's important. And why I would say that is some people might go, really?
Exactly.
I think what I learned was that I had to speak up for what I wanted, right? And I'll be honest, when I got pregnant for the first time, I started looking around, because I assumed, like a lot of people, there's no way I can make it happen. Surely I'm not going to be able to have both, because I don't want to work these hours. And until I just sat down with someone and just said, this is what I want. I really like what I'm doing. I feel like I'm contributing and I'm moving up. What can we do? And they were like, well, we have these opportunities and we can make it happen, so let's try. So I would say that I think people should try. They need to speak up for what, and this was regardless of if it's children or female or male, whatever, because so much of our personal lives mean a lot to us. You've got to ask and then try to make it work. But then it is definitely, it's a team effort. I needed to be able to still do what I said I was going to do on time. And I also needed to then for them to stay on to their side of the agreement and support me as I tried to manage that as best I could. So.
That's a good lesson. Yeah, I think a lot of people are ready to jump before they've even asked.
Right.
If there's a possibility there. Yeah, interesting. So when you did move on from Deloitte, what was your next move? Where did you go?
Well, I ended up at Maxwell Luck and Ritter, and they are the largest locally owned and operated CPA firm here, serving. We say Austin, but there's an Austin and a Round Rock office, so the greater Austin area. And like I mentioned, I interviewed with them when I was pregnant with my first child because I had heard wonderful things about them, and I had heard that they had this culture, that they had a saying that no success at work is worth failure at home. It's actually a core value now. But I remember just saying, let me just go meet them and see what it's like. But as I mentioned, it wasn't quite time for me. And I actually ended up staying with Deloitte 5 more years from my first interview with Maxwell Luck and Ritter. But when I finally felt that I was really up for just a different challenge and a different work environment, and again, just wanting some difference for me, sometimes we just feel that in our own being, I landed here, and I have been here I was there till 2011. I started in 2011, And within a few months of joining, I was actually given a really cool opportunity to move over into serving nonprofit clients completely. And that was really exciting for me. And then I stuck with the nonprofit niche until I left the firm.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting to me that you started in 2011. You were talking about the culture, and you had interviewed 5 years before that.
I'm slow to change. So
you're a good accountant.
Yeah.
No, but because MLR has been on that best firms for women list that Accounting Today puts out.
They have.
I know this last year, and I think a couple of years. So it's intriguing to me to know that it's something that's been in the culture for, 10 years or so now, if not longer.
If not longer. Yeah, it has been. I think the firm was started by some former Big Four accountants and really just wanted to bring together a group of really strong, smart people, but that also wanted to focus on life outside of the profession. So I think that they do make it part of everything they do, and they just believe in great people, great clients, and being part of the community. So they stuck with it from the beginning, and it really has become a part of their everyday work.
That's wonderful. So at what point did you become partner?
So after 3 years with the firm, I became partner and again was able to manage the nonprofit practice. And it's funny, I honestly said no the first time they asked me, which seems odd. But again, I'm slow to change, I guess, and maybe more risk averse than I probably might need to be. But I just respected what they had to offer so much, and I just didn't want to be the one to mess any of it up. So sure enough, it just took me a little soul searching and get a little over the fear, but then I became partner and loved every minute of it. Okay.
Was there anything that changed during that time, between the time you said no and then later?
Yeah, I talked to people. I went and just felt like I needed to ask questions of other partners. What is it really like? And again, most of it was fear driven. What if I'm the one who messed up, or if I don't know the answers? And they were consistent in the messaging, and the messaging back was, we're human. If we mess up, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. And I felt very safe and supported with the other partners in the group, that eventually I knew that they believed in me, and I had to go ahead and believe in myself as well. So, and it was a win-win, I think so.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is for the younger student, or not younger, but for the student audience that we have, they're not necessarily familiar with what life of a partner in an accounting firm is like. So what was being a partner at a major accounting firm like? I mean, what's a typical day or week like?
Sure. I think there's two things. I think I can only speak to my experience here at Maxwell Luck and Ritter. And so one thing that I loved how we did is we knew that we needed to play to our strengths. Each of us brought, at the time I was partner, there were about 20 of us, and we each brought something special and unique that only we could do, right? That we were the best in the world, that we were huge good to great believers, right? Jim Collins' book. And So we believed in you do what you're best at because that is when you're going to bring the most value to the firm. So we did that in our annual goal setting process. You kind of lay out, where does my time go? And so for me, a typical day may have looked different than someone else, is what I'm trying to say. So for me, of course, there's a technical piece of it. There's work paper review and going over complicated issues and complex accounting things with our clients, which I loved. But there was also, which is another part that I love, just learning and getting out into the community and connecting. So it was some days my kids would laugh at my calendar. 7 different meetings, 7 different parts of the city, right? You know, those days where you know how you got home, but you have been in a lot of other places throughout the day. So it was meeting a lot of the time that I think that people don't realize is how much time a partner spends on developing their people and then developing current clients that we're working with now, and then developing prospect client relationships. And so that is where so much of our time is spent as partners. And each of those, that's why I say it's not necessarily a numbers business. It is a people business. Not only are we in client service, but we really have to build up relationships. And so a lot of our time is spent that way.
Not now, obviously, but earlier on, if you think back to 2011 when you started, or 2013, when you became partner, around those times, did business development activity scare you at all, or have you always been just that kind of person?
No, I wouldn't say it scared me. Now, I'll say the saying that still gets thrown around is, I would never have called myself a rainmaker, right? People use that term a lot, and I don't know, it's never been one that I would call myself or enjoyed. But what I found is that each of us develops business in our own way, but you can't not figure out what your way is. Because if you're going to be a partner, you are responsible for making sure that you continue to have clients, because you have great people that you need to pay. So we have expenses, right? And that's the model. We have revenue and we have people, right? Those are we've got to pay them to do that great work. So it is important to manage those relationships. So for me, it was to make sure that my current clients felt that I was engaged and I was active and that I could connect them to resources. And then for me, looking for prospects was always, how can I help you connect the dots? Because even though business development may not happen in the moment, because they don't, sometimes lead times from meeting someone to them actually being a client is years. But you have to just stay with it and know that eventually these relationships, they normally bear fruit. So,
Okay. Well, before we move on out of that, is there anything else that you feel is important for younger professionals to know about becoming a partner if they want to go that track? Maybe they're just starting in public accounting.
Yeah. I would think there's a couple of things. If I could nail down the lessons that I feel like helped me as I look back, is one, there's always that percentage that only about 20% of success in a role really relates to the technical nature of what you do. But in our profession, because we are built on trust, you've got to get the technical down. So the sooner you can really start embracing more complex areas and start reading contracts and learning these things that may seem foreign to you now, I think being comfortable with complexity is a skill, right? Like every time your client, you never know what they're going to say when they call. The client's going to be like, oh, we just entered a new contract, and you have no idea what you're going to be looking at. So being comfortable with that, so the earlier you start asking for it, the better. And then I would say, when I always try to say is in that same, like I mentioned earlier, find other experts. So realize sometimes you may not be the right one to answer the question. And so partners, typically a skill set in partners is that they know how to pick up the phone quickly and say, hey, I have a client with this issue. Can you help me out? Because I'm not the right one, or who is going to be able to be that expert that's really going to help them. And then beyond the technical and learning to use experts in your work, is we have talked about it, but start growing your network and learn to grow it one person at a time. I feel like when I left Deloitte, that is the biggest thing that I learned. I realized, wow, I felt very connected, but I was very connected within the walls of that organization. And that made sense to me then. But when I moved into a local firm, I didn't have Austin connections, right? So whatever city you might be in, it's very interesting to realize how our networks can feel large, but we really always have an opportunity to expand them. So get creative with your networking, network with your teams, different just departments within your firm, but then also industry groups and places around where you might work, because you never know how they might benefit you in the end.
That is good advice. I'm curious, when you say build your network one by one, what do you mean?
Well, I think it was what your question, I probably didn't answer it really well earlier when you asked if I was scared of business development or if there was a fear. I think a lot of people have a fear because they're like, I'm shy and I don't want to go meet these people. But as many words as I come out with and as extroverted as I might seem, if I go into a happy hour situation, I get just as nervous as the next person. So what I found was someone always said, just go in with a goal of like one business card, right? Like go in, okay. Find the one person who is off maybe on their own and just start talking. And then it makes it more manageable rather than walking in and feeling like I need to meet all of these people and do that. That can get overwhelming. But again, if you can break it into bite-sized pieces and just kind of make one connection at a time, it'll quickly expand, because that one person oftentimes will end up saying, gosh, you know who you need to meet? You need to meet such and such. And you say, absolutely, I should. And then the chain starts without you having to go and seek it.
Okay. I could tell you were very intentional with that phrase. And so I was curious. And that's always been my thought too, is, it's much better to talk to one person, maybe two, and go deep, as opposed to try to leave with 20 business cards and you really didn't have any,
absolutely,
any meaningful conversation. So that makes a lot of sense. So tell us what you're doing now, because you've left Maxwell Lockham Ritter, correct?
I have.
Wow. Okay.
I know. I'm still mourning the loss. It was such a wonderful place, but I did. I left at the beginning of February of 2018, so just a little bit ago.
Okay, and for the audience, we're recording this in mid-February, so it's very fresh. It
is fresh. That's why I keep using we and our. It's, having to change my pronouns is throwing me a bit.
So what are you going to be doing exactly?
Absolutely. So I just decided after some soul searching and really with help from other partners here in the firm that I was ready to go off and launch my own business, and it's called Dena Speaks, and it's basically an inspiration-based line of speaking, writing, and guiding. So I just believe in the power of potential, and I love to get in front of people and just spark curiosity. And so I will be doing public speaking, obviously, doing conference speaking, corporate trainings. We'll probably have some webinars out there eventually, and, maybe my own podcast. Mark, I'll have to learn from you. But really just any way that I can get out there and spur on other potential seekers, because I feel like the world's in a place right now where we just want someone to just be real. And I feel like that's something I bring to the table. I'm pretty honest, and I like to and I can laugh at myself too through the process, but I've gone through my own personal growth journey, and I can't separate my personal from my professional growth journey. So for me, there were changes in both sides, obviously, deciding to make this leap into entrepreneurship. But that's what I'm going to be up to. So I will hopefully just be speaking and creating a community of people that are really just excited to learn more about themselves, but how they can make themselves better, but then how that makes the whole better. So anything in the corporate culture space is always fascinating to me. So I'm excited to launch into it.
Wonderful. What's your target audience? Is it size of company, or certain demographic?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would say that I nail it down to about 3 targets, right? One is I am drawn to what I call strong-willed women. And I include supportive dudes in that because there's this space of people that are just really into personal growth and understanding who they are and what they want to be about, knowing that that's going to bring forth a stronger version of themselves either in their home or their workplace. But then there's also, of course, in this accounting space, but also just client service-driven spaces where, like I mentioned before, it's a people business. So there are organizations not only in the accounting space, but I'm even finding in hospitality where they want to have a culture that appreciates the individual, but how that also then makes their organization as a whole stronger. So I've been fortunate to work with some regional accounting firms and look forward to working with other groups of all sizes. I'm hoping to be back in the walls of Deloitte someday sharing my story because they were part of mine. So, and then that third group is, and I've mentioned a little, but the nonprofit space. And I don't like to call it the nonprofit space because I like to call them mission-driven organizations because they are also in just dire need of someone just kind of just breathing some light back into them and some life because they work really hard, but oftentimes can lose track of themselves. So those are the folks I'm going to be working with.
Wow, that is exciting. Do you see yourself traveling quite a bit for this?
I hope so. I don't want to be gone too much because my kiddos are 10 and 12, and they don't appreciate me being gone too long, but they don't mind it when I have these summer conferences and they get to come with me. So we're hoping to have a little adventure, for the family and for myself. So some, but definitely I'm also really excited I've been commuting into town. So I live in a suburb about 20 miles south of Austin in Buda, Texas. Oh. And I'm really excited to be in my own community too and really learning them and being there because I slept there, but I drove here into town. And so I'm going to try to marry both of those communities that have been special to me. So.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes from when we started this recording, and one of the things I wrote down was you knew at a young age you always wanted to lead and be in charge. What are you going to do without people to be in charge of?
Oh, my goodness. Well, my poor kids. No, I'm just kidding. I think, and it's so funny you ask that because as we speak, and as you mentioned earlier, I'm only about 3 weeks out into this self-employment world, and I quickly realized that I'm not going to be able to work in my home all the time. I'll be finding either a co-working space or even right now I'm sitting in the walls of Maxwell Ritter. They allowed me to just reserve an office really for this time so I could be around people. And then hopefully, the bigger goal is that I grow, and by the end of my first year, I've got other staff and team members that are helping me build this dream up. So
there you go. Actually, a good virtual assistant can make a big difference when you're
I'll look into it.
Well, before we get to the final question, one of our listeners suggested this question a while back, and I like to try to include it whenever appropriate. And I think for someone like yourself, it's definitely appropriate. If you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice, just one, what do you think that might be?
Don't stop learning.
Okay.
Do you want me to expand? The biggest piece behind that is that at some point, and I called it the machine way earlier in the podcast, that the machine of the recruiting machine took over then, but the machine of life just kind of takes over, and we get really busy. We get really bogged down in just the day-to-day of our whatever your profession is, going through the audits and doing this, and then getting home with the kids. But I realized that at some point I stopped getting curious about new learning, and that was really energizing to me. And so I started reading again. And ever since then, I've not put it down. And I know that you're like, okay, you want me to not stop learning and you want me to read, really. I have no time. But I promise if you start to listen to speakers, if you go to conferences or if you go to listen to podcasts or whatever, you're going to hear oftentimes they say, well, the last book I read I read this. And I was like, wow, it's really trying to just make sure that we're not just scrolling through information, right, through all of our feeds, but actually learning something new and seeing a different viewpoint and just kind of spiking your curiosity again. So that is what works for me because I do enjoy new learnings and it keeps things fresh.
That's a good point. It's important to take accountability for your own continuing education, so to speak.
Right.
There you go. So I end every podcast with the same 3 questions, and I like to use the same questions because I think it gives us some good consistency, and frankly, I think some of the best insight comes out of the last 3 questions on each episode. So the first one is usually the easiest.
Okay.
What has been your proudest moment?
My proudest moment is not one moment. It is my 2 children in every moment. If they do anything or I see them doing something kind or I hear some accomplishment and you see them being proud of themselves, then my heart just bursts. So I'm just proud of my babies.
How old are they now?
10 and 12. They will always be my babies. So.
I was going to say, my 12-year-old doesn't like me referring to her as a baby anymore.
Probably not, but.
Well, second, tell us about a mistake you've made. And, of course, we want to know what you learned from it. But frankly, the bigger the better.
Okay. I wish that I could really think of a really big mistake because I believe in learning from those. But the one that, for whatever reason, still makes my stomach turn right now was one that may not seem that big, but I was a senior manager at Deloitte, and I had turned in a report for review to a partner. And I remember that I'll just be honest, I had just, same as last year, I pretty much just copied it, changed the dates, and hadn't really done a thorough review. And it came back with a few comments, but then she called me, and she just all she asked was, Dena, did you review this against the latest template? And I remember I had to choose. Am I going to lie to this woman that I respect? And I had to just say no. And I know that doesn't sound really big, but in the moment, to have to literally face this woman and feel like, when your parents were disappointed in you, that's what it was. It was just knowing she was disappointed. I remember just being so embarrassed. And so I learned that whatever I need to do or whatever I'm doing, I have to do it to the best of my ability and realize that quality matters. And not only did the quality matter, but it was in the best interest because we need to manage risk. So I needed to learn that I had to have quality because it manages risk for myself and the firm. And finally, then I found that you could be held accountable and have that person still be really kind and gracious to you because it never came up again. But it still hurts me because I respected her so much. So, yeah.
Well, it's important you didn't back up the one mistake with a second mistake of lying about it.
Right. Yeah, I know. And again, it seems little, but I think it's when you really do realize that you really do respect the people you work with, that you need to give them the respect they deserve with your work.
That is a good lesson. Well, last question, and then we will close it down. Sure. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
The best piece of advice that I have ever received was very clearly, don't ever make a decision solely based out of fear. And Heather McKissick, a wonderful executive here in Austin, she, not in the CPA space, but she was one of the people I reached out to. As I mentioned earlier, in my soul searching on becoming a partner, I reached out to her and just kind of talked her through what I was thinking. And she was really kind. And she basically said, you called me, right? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, so I can say whatever I want. And I said, oh, no, yes. And she said, well, you're just being a scaredy cat. And you can't ever make that decision solely based out of fear. And she said, others believe in you and you need to do it for yourself. So I've held that in my pocket ever since because fear can have a pretty good hold. So I try to not let it lead my judgments.
Wow, you need to keep in touch with her.
I know. She's wonderful. I still thank her. She's wonderful.
That's neat. Wow. Well, thank you again. I know this is a busy time for you starting a new business, and so I really appreciate you taking the time to share with our audience.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, for our audience, this has been another episode of Life and Accounting, the Where Accountants Go podcast. If you haven't yet visited the website, please do so. You can find us at whereaccountantsgo.com. We have the show notes for each and every episode, including this one, of course. That's whereaccountantsgo.com. On that note, Dena, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave with the audience?
Yeah, final thoughts, I guess, is I would love to stay connected with you and your audience. And if they ever want to reach out or try to find me, they could always go and look at denajansen.com. And they could find me there and get links to my social. If they want to watch an accountant try to build up a speaking practice, it might be a hoot sometimes. But really, the final word that I always remember is that I tell my kids every day is just make good choices. So we're blessed to be humans and get to be in control of our lives. So just do the best you can to make good choices.
That is good advice. We're going to put a link on the website, but spell out the website just for anybody.
Sure. It's my full name, DenaJansen.com, DenaJansen.com.
Wonderful, DenaJansen.com. Well, thank you again to the audience for joining us. We will see everyone next week. There's more to come.